Hi, this is James Walsh from Star Sailor, and you're listening to the Liverpool Connection podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Liverpool Connection podcast. I am one of your hosts, Daz, and I've got Mr. OG back in the house, Steve, and we've got a really interesting guest today. He's not a Liverpool supporter, but he has a lot to do with football. Former referee and former boss of the PGMOL. That's a mouthful to say. But we're going to talk today about his history with refereeing, and then we'll get into his thoughts on the modern game and what's going on with that. But Keith, it's Keith Hackett. Welcome to the pod.
Delighted to be with you. It's a long time since I started refereeing. I started in 1960, believe it or not, in Sheffield. Had no intentions of becoming a referee. And then received a call one Saturday morning from the county FA saying, Mr. Hackett, referee, Hillsborough Boys Club versus Sheffield United Juniors. And before I could say no, the phone went down. So that morning, I can tell you, was a bit of a rush because I had to go out and borrow a shirt, to get a kit, to look reasonably like a referee. Go to the local sports shop and buy a watch, an Ingersoll watch with 3/4 of the dial in green, and a whistle. And I can remember that game as though it was yesterday, believe it or not. And then I progressed at grassroots level for 12 years. And I can tell you that I never left the grassroots level game. Mm-hmm. By that, I might, as I did, referee a Football League, Premier League game, or even an international game midweek. If I hadn't got a game on a Saturday or Sunday, which sometimes happened, then I would be refereeing two pub teams. So, you'd run out there and they'd ask you, where were you midweek? And I might say, well, West Germany versus Italy or Anfield, wherever. But every game that I officiated was a cup final. So it didn't matter whether I was in the front of the crowd at the Kop or anywhere else in England or around the world refereeing. Two pub teams were just as important to me because it was pride in performance. So, after 12 years, I was promoted to the Football League as a linesman. I ran the line for 3 years. I always found that difficult. I was then promoted to the Football League list. I can remember my first game. It was Stockport County versus Northampton Town. In 1979, I was appointed to referee Arsenal versus Liverpool at Hillsborough, which was my home team. I support Sheffield Wednesday. And my dad used to take me to the ground every time there was a home match. And it was almost a tradition that we walked the 3 miles to the ground from where I live. We would stop off at the pub. My dad would have 2 or 3 pints or more. I'd have a bottle of orange juice. And then at Hillsborough, we stood on the Kop. I would abseil down the top of the crowd to the front of the spectators. So in 1979, my father had passed away, sadly. I decided, having got my first game at Hillsborough as a referee, to drive to where I used to live. It was all the houses had been razed to the ground. It was just wasteland. Park the car up, walk the 3 miles to that particular ground, and that game 0-0. And it went to the next draw, and I had the replay at Villa Park. They drew again, and it was this famous game that seemed to have 4 or 5 replays before they got a result.
That's crazy to think that. I mean, it's great that you. I can't remember like last week sometimes. I think that has to do with having 4 kids, but yeah, it's great that. I mean, that you've had this long-lasting, refereeing career. I mean, do you retired right before you were 50 as well, which is
Yeah, I mean, I actually officiated at Football League the 2 years of the Premier League and the international panel for 23 years. And I've got to tell you, obviously, because you're in the States, in 1981, I was invited, 81, 82, I think it was, invited to be a guest referee on the North American Soccer League. So I spent 6 weeks refereeing probably close to 30 games in the NASL, learned about how the game was launched in America in terms of all the spectacle. I can tell you one story. I was appointed to referee New York Cosmos versus Vancouver Whitecaps at Giant Stadium, New York, outside New York. We were locked in the tunnel. I was being driven to the ground, and so I was in like a chauffeur-driven car, which was quite nice. But we were stuck. There'd been an accident in Lincoln Tunnel, and that was fairly chaotic. The time was ticking on, and then all of a sudden, my driver got out the car and started shouting in a foreign language. And I can tell you that shortly afterwards, a guy sat next to me with his football boots in his hands, Carlos Alberto, the captain of New York Cosmos, was sat next to me as we then finished the ride to the stadium. It was interesting because I got to about 400 yards, 500 yards to the stadium. And I thought, I don't think this would be a good look if I got out the car one side and Carlos Alberto the next. It wouldn't do much for integrity. So I decided I'd stop the car and I walked that extra 400-500 yards to the stadium on my own, walking through the fans, of course, enjoying their barbecues ahead of the game. Something that doesn't happen at Anfield, Old Trafford, Highbury, or anywhere else in the world. It's something special in the American game.
Were you able to have a little chit chat with him?
It was a bit blurted. I mean, he was worrying, and I just said, "Look, calm down. The one thing I can assure you is the game's not going to go ahead without me being there." And he looked in surprise when he suddenly realised I was the referee. But some great experiences. Musical accompaniment to one game, which I thought was amusing. Jojo Canaglia. It's a famous, if you like, player within the New York team, but also within American football at that particular time, even though there was, the likes of Best and everybody else, Rodney Marsh and all those playing. But I can remember very early on cautioning, giving a yellow card to Canaglia, who had disallowed a goal. He climbed on the back of a defender, openly climbed on the back of a defender to nod the ball in the back of the net. I ruled it out. I got a few expletives. I showed the yellow card, which I was trying to avoid, but I did. And then at full time, he came in the dressing room, I thought, for an argument, but he wanted the yellow card. So he asked me to sign the yellow card, which I always thought was highly amusing. But I suppose that was typical of the game in America and how it was projected.
Well, I wanted to ask you because I was 11 years old in 1981, and even though Liverpool weren't playing, you did the FA Cup final, Spurs versus Man City, which went to a replay, which Ricky Villa scored one of the best goals at Wembley, a 30-yard, slalom run. Was that your first FA Cup final? You've
got to realise that as a referee in England, you only get the cup final once. That tradition was broken during COVID with, I think, Anthony Taylor getting the game, 2 games on the bounce, or it might have been Michael Oliver. But up to that particular point and beyond, you refereed the cup final once. I'd been there in '79 on the line, running the line. Manchester United Arsenal. And I remember that because sometimes they'll play the replay, and I sort of looked the other way because at one point I signalled for a throw-in, and because I was perspiring heavily, the flag went straight out of the hand and finished up about 20 yards down the touchline. The game was still going on, and I was having to inch down the line to recover the flag, which my colleagues at the time were all found that absolutely amusing. For me, it was sort of not a happy moment. The cup final, yeah. I can remember being in the tunnel watching famous players about to go onto the field. It was dark because it was in a tunnel area. It was cool, and then of course you remember that walk up the pathway onto the pitch, and then the lining up and the national anthem, the ceremony around it. The game finished up with Hutchinson of Manchester City scoring at both ends, so it was 1-1. As I walked up the steps, the traditional walk to get the medal, I didn't know whether I got the replay or not because this was the first replay that's going to at Wembley. And as I passed the Queen Mother, who was doing the presentation, I nodded, obviously did the bow and walked past, and then suddenly realised I was getting the replay. At the bottom of the steps, it was confirmed. And I tell a story because before the game, the FA guy comes in and he says, "You've got the biggest decision to make before the game." And I've gone, "What do you mean?" "Well, you've got a decision. Either we present you with a medal or you get a match fee of £35. So when you look back, it was the first £1 million gate money receipt in the first game, and they set aside 35 quid if I didn't want the medal. After the replay, the FA guy came in and said, "You got both, the 35 quid and the medal." I never cashed the cheque. I gave it to a local school, and they for a number of years had it on the wall. So for me, I just got the cup final medal. But it was a great occasion.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think for a few years, the FA Cup kind of lost its shine.
Yeah.
Because, it was the same kind of big teams always in the final. I think these last couple of years, it's gotten a little bit better. But, I remember always the whole Saturday morning, household getting ready for watching the FA Cup. I had a shandy, my parents would give me a shandy.
Yeah. I mean, it was tradition.
Mm-hmm.
We all did that. We all, I can remember, hey, crikey, I can remember sitting crowded on the floor in a neighbour's house in 1953, watching a black and white television that was kept going up and down of the Stanley Matthews Cup final, which is remarkable. But football throws these stories up. I can remember my first game on the line at Anfield. It's a massive occasion, and I was on the left wing on the Kop side. Stevie Highway was playing, and I've got to tell you, even to this day, he could give me 15 yards and still beat me, even though I was a fit referee because he was that quick. And my very first game to referee there was Liverpool versus Wolves. And I remember it because I have to tell you, a mate of mine, and this might surprise you, but a very good friend of mine, on that day, he and I didn't know each other because it was Emily Hughes of Liverpool, the captain. And the ball's gone through, and there's a foul, and it's a clear foul against Liverpool. And Emily News was not happy, and he knew that this was my first game, so he was going to try and dominate. And I knew that. I knew as a young guy that this would be the case. Emily Hughes came up to me with a few expletives, I've got to tell you that, and had a real pop at me. And I've gone, "What's your name?" And he's gone, "What?" I've gone, "What's your name?" And he goes, "You know my name. I'm the Liverpool captain." And I go, "Look, what's your name?" And he said, "Have you not seen me on Question of Sport?" And I've gone, "I want your name." And then I suddenly, he goes, "Emily." I went, H-E, fictitiously, M-L-I-N-G. To which, with an expletive, he goes, "It's Emily News." And I went, "That's all I wanted to know." And some weeks later, I was driving down the A1 when this car nearly ran me off the road. And I looked across and I thought, I was giving it a peeps and I was not happy. I was on my way to work. I worked in Romford in Essex, some like 3 hour drive. And it was Emily News in the car. And as we came, the country was scattered then with little chefs. And I always remember him pointing in the direction, and we came off and we sat for the next couple of hours having a cup of coffee. He was signing autographs of people who were coming in and having the breakfast. And then he became manager of Rotherham United and played local football. Would you believe this? Emily News, the former England captain, Liverpool player, played in grassroots football in Sheffield and played some charity matches as well. And I used to referee them. And then I was sat with him once at Bramall Lane. He didn't have a good word to say about the referee throughout the match. He was having a pop at the referee. And then sadly, and I used to bump into him, and we'd always have a good conversation. But then sadly, a few days before he passed, I got a call from I don't think it was an agent, I think it was a friend, saying, "Look, Emlyn would like to meet you at Bramall Lane and just sit there and watch a game," which we did. He was not in a good way, obviously, with his brain tumor, but 3 days was past. But it was sometimes we think that referees and players are always having a go with each other. You don't realise that in a working environment, and they recognise a tough environment for a match referee, and if you do reasonably well, they'll get on. And I always remember, I did the Charity Shield at Wembley. I'm not going to give you the result, but it was Everton versus Liverpool, and
yeah,
and Grobbler, it was up to his antics on the line. But the one thing is that coming off that match, I always remember that a lot of Liverpool players thanked me and said it was as much occasion for me as it was for them. They were disappointed with the result.
Yeah.
And the other thing, why Kenny Dalglish is my most favourite player, and people can't believe this, because obviously I've refereed the likes of Best, Maradona, Beckenbauer and Platini and many great players. Emlyn Hughes epitomised the player who played 100% 90 minutes. And you may not be aware, but I refereed Juventus in a European Cup game, and the owner of Juventus, Agnelli, was I got summoned up to his boardroom after the match, which is not a place for a referee to go, but I had a UEFA delegate with me. And I always remember Agnelli saying, "How is my favourite player?" And he talked about John Charles, who'd played for the Leeds player who'd played for Juve. and I informed him that John Charles had gone bankrupt a few weeks before, and they organised very quickly a testimonial game. And that day, Kenny Dalglish turned out for Leeds United. So amazing, isn't it?
Well, that was one of my questions. Is like, out of all the games and players you've seen, who was your favourite? And yeah, I mean, King Kenny, just it's not just that he was an amazing footballer. He's an amazing person, human being.
Yeah. Yeah.
He gives so much to charity and everything else. But what again, who let's go the opposite direction. Who was your worst player to be on the pitch? Like who was that player that really kind of would foul constantly, was just, not
I think yeah, I think that.
Give us the dirt, Keith. Come on.
Yeah, well, I think that there were different attitudes by different players, and you got to know them. If you took Manchester United and Bobby Robson, Brian Robson, he would want to referee the game. And I tell you a story that I went out. They were going to referee. I was coming towards the end of my career, and I went out the middle, and it was around Christmas time, and they're playing Wimbledon. And I'd had Wimbledon a few weeks before, and it had been a really tough game. Everybody, you know that they had John Fashanu, and he was like a windmill. You knew that they had Vinnie Jones, who was a committed player that was on the edge. You had Dennis Wise, who would kick the odd player off the ball. But the one that you really looked at was Laurie Sanchez, because he was the sneaky one that used to put in the nasty one off the ball that sparked the problems. So you had to have eyes all over. You had Brian Orton, who was Luton Town, and he would give you. He was like Robson. He'd give you a running commentary during the course of the match. But what I think was important was, I was told the other week, and I believe the information. In 23 years of refereeing, the guy said to me, "I've looked at all the stats, Keith. I think I've got most of your games. It looks as though you only sent 10 players off in that career." So I worked with players. I communicated with them. My view was I wanted to go on the field and come off with the same number, but also recognise that being 6'1", that I had some power and I could put that power over if I need to, verbally and almost physically, to stop a player going out of control. But hey, there are lots of memories. I can remember being appointed to referee Gdansk versus Juve in a European Cup match. I was informed when I applied for a visa that visas weren't being applied because of the rise of solidarity. FIFA came in and said, "This referee's got to referee this game. If he doesn't, the game is forfeited. Juve will go through." Interestingly, this was the second leg, and Juventus were winning 7-0 first leg. So there wasn't much chance of Gdansk getting a result. I can remember meeting Lech Walesa, who became the president of the country, before the game. He did come to the match. The game was altered for a period whilst the crowd opened up and started shouting solidarity. That in itself was a remarkable experience that football gave me. I can remember refereeing New Zealand versus Australia in a World Cup game. and it was no better than, I'm not being disrespectful here, but it wasn't a tough encounter. It was a game that I would have expected the reserves of a football league team in the fourth division to give you. But I can remember coming off that particular pitch and receiving a phone call from the wife saying I'd lost my job because I'd taken time off apparently without permission, which was a load of nonsense. But I want to get over the point that throughout my career, I was an amateur referee in a professional environment. Yes, I got a match fee, but in Europe, I didn't get a match fee. Mm-hmm. So having lost that job and picked another job up some months later, I had to charter my own aircraft to get me back from Stuttgart in order to attend a board meeting. So you can imagine throughout my career, those challenges of getting from my work of employment to referee a football match. I can remember leaving the company at about 3:30 in the afternoon in Sheffield and walking on the pitch at Highbury for a 7:45 kickoff. Don't tell me how I got there, but I did. But can you imagine the pressure of driving down the M1 and across the 406 North Circle around London to get to a football match, getting in the dressing room and saying, "Hi guys, come on, out." No pre-match warm-up, no cup of tea, nothing, just straight out and referee a game. And then back home that evening. And this is why when eventually I retired from refereeing, and by the way, I upset the Football Association big time because referees at that particular time in Europe, in FIFA, would retire at 45. So I'd retired from FIFA. I was now coming up to the retirement age of 47, 48, when the Premier League was formed. And I was then asked if I would stay on for a season, and then they extended that for a second season, at which I then said, look, this is going to be my last season. And I can remember driving over the hill from Sheffield to Old Trafford to referee Manchester United versus Liverpool. And only myself knew that this was my last game. It wasn't the end of the season. But I refereed that game, came off, and one of my linesmen said, "See you in a couple of weeks." I noticed I was somewhere in the Midlands, and I went, "No, I'm not. This is my last game." And so I ended, and that's the connection with Liverpool. My last game was Man United Liverpool. Some years later, I was the UEFA delegate assessor. The Premier League was formed. I wrote a paper to the chairman of the Premier League saying that the ability to prepare thoroughly as the game was getting quicker to referee professional football, you had to introduce professional referees. They offered me the job when they agreed that that's what they would do. And I wasn't prepared to move from Sheffield to live in London. So I became the development manager, and then decided that we should have communication kits, and we introduced those. I introduced sports science, a vision scientist, the sports psychologist. We changed the remit of refereeing. We professionalized refereeing, made them fitter. The sort of changes were that probably in my games in an era would be doing 9,500 meters per game. When I left, we were averaging 11,500 meters. A bigger figure than any player, usually. We were doing, in my era, 15 sprints. When I left, referees were doing 25 to 50 sprints. It was that variable, but it was based on the changing dynamic of the game. The pass-back law had created a faster, quicker game. We'd move referees from endurance to dynamic sprinting and all those changes. So a couple of years after it was formed, I became the boss of the PGMOL, and that was a challenge in itself because I made referees accountable. You know, if they had if they made the error that Paul Tierney made this weekend, giving the drop ball. I'm sad that it's Liverpool, but it gave the drop ball incorrectly. Something in basic law that a senior referee shouldn't do. Really shouldn't make that error. You know, the law's changed. If it was inside the penalty area, it's dropped to the goalkeeper. If it's outside the penalty area, it's dropped to the player, the team who last played that ball. It's a very, very simple, uncomplicated law. Difficult to understand why a senior, very experienced referee should make that error. Yes, he's human, but he made it twice in the game. And as a consequence, I always applied a level of accountability. So instead of being VAR this coming weekend, he would have been sat on his hands, receiving some operational advice. I'd want to know why he did it. And then at the same time, I have to tell you this, the same question would be asked of the two assistants and the fourth official. Because my pre-match instructions, which are, you know, and I'm not clever, Dick, a lot of referees will say, look, to their assistants, please ensure when I'm restarting the game that I'm restarting the game correctly. So what I want them to do when the game stopped, I want them to be looking and focusing what happened last time and what's going to start. And they've got communication kits. Yeah. And I know they work. Therefore, he could have said to Tierney, hey, what are you doing? You're dropping it to the wrong team. And there's that inherent lack of teamwork that's been designed. I mean, look, I spent, I don't know how many years at the PGMOL, but I left them with a cadre of world-class referees. I'd introduced goal line technology to help. And the criteria laid down on those things. Referees knew what they had to do and how to do it. And I gave them every support mechanism. Just like I used to say to the managers at their pre-season meeting, I am the 21st manager in the Premier League. I'm not getting your salaries, by the way, I used to say to them. But I am the 21st manager. And the way I select referees is dead simple. It's the same way that you pick your players. If you have players who are in form and performing well, they're in the team next week. It's as simple as that. If they're missing open goals, they're making poor passes, making challenges, or tactically not doing the things that I've set up as a manager, as a player manager, then in that sense, they're not in the team. And so I operated the same way. And in those first few years, I determined that a few referees weren't good enough. You know, just like a manager says, you know, I've come up from the Championship to the Premier League. There are some of those players he knows not going to be good enough for the challenges in the Premier League. So what he does, the manager can sell them on. What I did was say to those individuals, look, I don't think the capacity of your officiating is good enough to sustain a position with us. I'll give you 1 year's salary, or I'll drop you down into the leagues for you to continue refereeing. And if at any point you get your form back or you demonstrate that you're a class act, I'll look to promote. So no different. That clearly is not taking place, and that's disappointing.
Steve, I know you've got a load of questions, so go ahead, lad.
Hey Keith, thanks for joining us. Yeah, it's an honor for me to speak to Keith. I first got my referee badge back in 1996, so
Wow.
I've ref tons of games up to the collegiate and semi-pro level. So this was when I heard that you were coming on. I was so excited, and just listening to you speak about your experiences has been amazing. And I just wanted to. My first question was, I also have my coaching badges, and I've told Dazza this. Like when I watch a game as a former player and a coach and a ref, it's hard for me to watch the game and just enjoy myself. So, how about yourself when you're watching? And are you enjoying just the spectacle of the game? Or are you actually kind of assessing the referees at the same time, like I do?
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. I don't think that I can ever enjoy a game. That's the truth. I mean, I go to football matches. I'm president of a grassroots football club, so I watch my team, and we got 21 teams of all ages. So I do watch the youngsters as well. I'm watching the referee. We know that the process of refereeing, decision making, is to see, recognize, think, and act. That's the process. It's as simple as that. And the seeing part is where there's a lot of shortfall. The shortfall is the ability of the referee to develop and read the game. And that takes a few years and and there's shortcuts that can apply. Positioning becomes critical. I've analysed thousands of games at professional level, European level. And when you actually get down to it, the simple fact is that the errors are made, not usually through a lack of law knowledge, as at the weekend, but in reality, they're made because they don't see the incident. And the reason they don't see the incident is they've not got themselves into a good viewing angle. They've not anticipated. In some instances, they've gone narrow. And over recent years, particularly with Kalina taking over at FIFA and Europe, we had those match officials behind the goals in Europe. And as a result of that, he got the referees squeezing play between the referee and the assistant. And so you actually often found that the referee was at the right-hand front of the box when the ball was being crossed from the right wing. And he was completely and utterly out of position, missing those challenges of the runners coming in late and doing the nasty bits or fouling their opponents and missing those. So for me, I watched the Manchester Derby at the weekend on television, and I watched Andy Madley, and he's got fitter, more mobile, and his game has been enhanced through it. He's already a solid communicator. He's also at times a risk taker. He's unselfishly will play an advantage if there's that opportunity. And I hope that he continues to be encouraged to apply his style in his way, because it's a good way on the game.
Also president of a youth club here, and I'm the referee mentor. And one thing is I tell the younger referees as we're building out that program is to make sure you get the easy things right. You have your mechanics down. And so Paul Tierney's mistakes this last weekend, they're just uncalled for. Like you said, you should know better. You have communications between all four officials that you should be able to rely on your teammates, and they are a team. But also, I have a lot of sympathy for that level, because you've already alluded to it quite a few times, how fast the game is. You had to, Stevie Highway chasing you, you're running and trying to keep up with him. Now all the sides are almost at that same type of pace, and a lot of the things are missed because of the positioning, how they're running their diagonals and things on the pitch. Do you have that type of sympathy for the refs, or because I think we had a game a couple of weeks ago, we had a player injured and the referee was not in the best position to see the foul. And then
Yeah.
it went to VAR, but they couldn't make that
Yeah.
determination if it was a red or not. So, are you sympathetic to the current profession now? How fast the game is?
Yeah. The answer is no. I'm not sympathetic because the reason I brought in sports science, the simple thing like warm up that team referees do. I introduced that with Professor Matt Weston. So we have a full remit of nutrition expertise, of sports science expertise. I even brought in sprint coaches to actually increase their acceleration. A player, if you take, I'm going back a bit, if you take somebody like, I suppose, Highway or other players within the game that move at pace, they're actually moving at 7 meters per second. That's what is regarded scientifically as being a high speed run. So my expectation was, if you take somebody like Howard Webb and Clattenburg and Halsey, these referees were expected to run between edge of penalty area to the other penalty area in 11 seconds. So the whole aspect is how you coach the referees, and the dynamics of their coaching has to be short, sharp bursts of speed. Now, what we've got is, I don't necessarily blame the referee, I blame the organisation. I helped set up the PGMOL. My budget was 5 million. That budget now is 26 million. So 26 million is being spent on referees and assistant referees that operate within the professional game here in England. So it's not a funding issue here. This is about the manager, whoever that is. If that's Klopp, and he looks at one of his players and he doesn't believe he's putting in the physical effort, right? It's not about perception anymore. It's about reality. We have measuring tools to determine the work rate, the speed, the power that's required. If those referees can't meet those obstacles, if you like, those objectives, they shouldn't be refereeing at the elite level. Mm-hmm. So you see, I am unforgiving because I want perfection. I'm no different to Klopp. I'm no different to Guardiola. In refereeing terms, I want the very best. I argued for professional refereeing. I argued with UEFA because UEFA were not investing in their referees. I helped to write and create, with other referees, the UEFA Referee Convention, so that training, management, selection, procedures, recruitment, retention are all standard processes. Look, I had discussions with US Soccer, right, and with the MLS prior to their formation of professional referees. I actually gave them the title Pro Ref. I was under contract with the PGMOL when the MLS offered me a contract to live in New York and manage pro refereeing. I couldn't take it because I'd signed a contract, which is a regret in life. But I'm demanding. I write it. And I've alienated myself with some referees because they don't like criticism. And I've been listening today because sometimes I write on a platform called the Referee Network, and the guy thinks I'm having a personal go at Paul Tierney. I'm not. I'm having a go at the organisation that manages it. Mm-hmm. Why was he selected for that game? Is he delivering top-level performances? Yes, his experience. Are there any referees better? And so this is why I think when we're coaching young referees, we're giving them all the tools that are possible. You know, when I commissioned the book on nutrition for referees, I said to the Premier League thought, oh, we could sell this. And I've said, no, it's an electronic version. It's written by one of the best sports science guys in England at the time. That's free for referee at all levels. The presentations on things like body language, smart objectives, goal setting, are all presentations that I do based and formed from my discussions of bringing in a sports psychologist. You know, when I first said I'm bringing a sports psychologist in, they all looked at me as though I was off the planet. They thought they were all going to lie on a couch and have a coin drawn in front of their eyes. You know, we talked about preparation, dealing with pressure, sports goals targeting, body language, all those sort of things, which make up the matrix of a good referee, but also developing management expertise. You know, when you work with thousands of referees, as I have done, they all have different approaches, and you don't want to spoil that because it's art. Refereeing is an art. It's not a science. Sciences are there to use. But what you want to do is, when you do that SWOT analysis on that referee, you know his weaknesses, and that's what you've got to work on. Whatever they are. If they're the fitness side, fine. You've got some referees who want to fight with players, not physically, but verbally. They're too dictatorial. They don't operate in the sphere in which they work. You know, you probably don't go into the bank if you're a bank worker wearing a pair of jeans and a T-shirt with "I love me" on. You probably have a shirt and tie, or you have a shirt and a jacket. You have to mold your refereeing and shape it to the game that's in front of you. And every game, no matter what level, people used to say to me, so you've had West Germany, Italy on Wednesday. Why are you refereeing us, two pub teams that want to argue with each other, that aren't fit and all that? Because in front of me was a blank canvas. And that blank canvas would give you a learning opportunity. And it's that learning opportunity that's so important, like you're doing with your expertise and knowledge, how to pass on. I can remember a linesman. I taught linesman rather than assistant referee. I'd refereed Vancouver Whitecaps in Vancouver on what was a wet and miserable cold day. I caught the plane, and I can remember to this day getting off the plane in Tulsa, because the following day I was refereeing Tulsa. It was 100 degrees and 90% humidity or whatever they kept telling me. It was like being in an oven. And I sat there, and it wasn't about, am I capable of refereeing this match on a very narrow pitch? I was more concerned about the weather and the temperature. And I started putting up fences. When I walked out, and I've gone, God, you know, I hadn't got changed yet. And I walked out and went, oh, it's like this. It was burning. And I've gone, I'm not going to last physically. Up here, I was being defeated. And I can remember this coach of the team coming in. And I said, how do players playing this? I said, because I'm not so sure I can cope. The guy says, they think exactly the same as you. The pace of the game, Mr. Hackett, will not be a challenge to you. They'll walk around the field of play. They'll delay the game whenever they can. You will not get a 90-minute game. Don't worry. And it wasn't a problem. But that little bit of information, if you like, broke down the barrier. And I think this is what we do as former referees. It's easy to sit there and say, Paul Tierney's made a technical error. He shouldn't make it. And then I'm saying, why didn't his assistant referees and why didn't his fourth official come in? Why didn't he come in? You know, and it's the same with challenges. We can get into the old remit of VAR. VAR operates the best in the world in America. Greg Barkey at ProRef, who operates it, I've been in presentations with him, and I know that it works better than anywhere else in the world. And I'm sure it has its odd problems. Over here, it's a disaster. And we're kidding ourselves. And you know, we're going to persist with it because we're going to improve it. Well, it's 5 years we've had it. And we're making basic errors. And the basic errors, one, are that we've got a guy refereeing on a Saturday, VAR on a Sunday. He's still got his game in his mind up here on what's, you know, we all look at our game negatively, not positively as referees. We don't think about that wonderful advantage that we played that resulted in a goal. We think, was that a penalty or not a penalty? Was it in the right place? Should I have sent that player off? Should have, you know, those sort of things are the things that that baggage is still with that referee when he sits at Stockley Park the following day and he's VAR, in my opinion.
I know Dazza wants to really get into the VAR subject here pretty soon, but I did want to ask you another question real quickly. You know, there've been a lot of rule changes over the years, you know, after Italia 90, to speed up the game, the back pass rule and all those were implemented to improve the game. My question, and it's one of I think the fundamental question of a lot of new referees or even people that watch the game, just how can we not decide what a handball in the box is? How can we not decide what offsides is? The rule seems to change every other year, and it confuses not just referees, fans, coaches. I know there's coaches that are still coaching like the handball rule was from 4 years ago, right? So why is that, and what can be done to, you know, standardize the rule?
Yeah, I think
forward.
Well, I mean, I've been saying that for the last 2-3 years, exactly the same. I think that the formulation of the laws of the game under David Ellery, where he was asked to rejig them, simplify them, as a school teacher, I'm being a bit negative, he did the opposite. He started to add words, which in itself adds interpretation. Look, there's the laws of the game, 1936. I'm going to turn to Law 12, handball. It says, a player shall be penalised if he intentionally handles the ball, i.e., carries, strikes, or propels it with the hand or arm. That's it. Mm-hmm. Body shape bigger. So we've all got to be experts in body mechanics to understand the movement of a player.
I can't even spell silhouette.
and we know full well that the hands and arms are used for balancing in any sportsman person. How do we judge that? How do we judge the distance, the space, the power, the mind of a player? The handball law is a complete mess. No question. And I don't know if you've seen the minutes of the IFAB that's come out this week. They came out on Saturday. I've already made comment. You're a referee with some standing and experience. I'm going to read you the law amendment. Law 12 fouls and misconduct. Handball offences that are not deliberate and for which penalties are awarded are to be treated in the same way as other fouls. Gobbledygook. Absolute gobbledygook. Right. Penalty kicks. Part of the ball must touch or overhang the centre of the penalty mark. Encroachment by outfield players will be penalised only if it has an impact. These are changes that are coming. I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. These guys at the IFAB haven't got a clue what they're doing. And they are ignoring the fact that many of us, when we refereed, don't have linesmen, don't have assistant referees. How can we judge deliberate play on offsides, the intricacies of the offside law? We don't have toes offside in grassroots football. We just don't. But what happens is the people who are sat on the side of the field, those parents who are watching their kids play, think that the man in the middle can operate in the same way as the guy with the professional level.
Well, Keith, the major problem here in the United States is the lack of referees, especially at the grassroots level. Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the parents and the coaches don't know the rules.
Yeah.
And then when they're very vociferous on the sidelines, it intimidates the younger grassroots assistant refs or lines people, and they fall out. They don't continue the pathway where, most of us that have refed want those younger people to start, especially if there's not a pathway as a player. This is a great way to stay connected to the game and really, make an impact. Like our friend Ismail Elfath, he's a neighbor. He lived 2 minutes from me, right?
Yeah, wonderful referee.
Yeah, we used to play together. He decided to do the pathway to be professional, and he's one of the top referees in the world.
Absolutely.
But the reason why he became a ref is because everybody started arguing with him whenever he was playing, and he would argue with the ref. He's like, they told him, hey, if you can do better, start reffing. And then he did and decided that was for them. But we're losing a lot of the younger people. And every weekend there's games that you can't get a full crew because people are just scared to ref. And so I think simplifying the rules would be such a great way to just help that issue moving forward. So that's,
I think let me tell you, I think one of the things that should happen, and I think it could happen in America easier because of the way you run tournaments, that you should ban parents from those tournaments. I know that's difficult. Mm-hmm. And that might be a revenue stream that's gone. But in reality, something has to be done. There's no question. Now, I've suggested to the FA here that we should have what effectively is a referee mentor, but a referee steward, that every team should have someone who's been a former player, now an administrator with that junior tide, and he goes and has meetings and chats with referees and perhaps has an understanding, a really reasonable understanding of the laws of the game. And then he is the conduit between the club and the referee, and the one that communicates with the referee. And he, if necessary, walks down that touchline and polices it and says to those vociferous supporters and parents, you either stop or you leave.
Keith, you mentioned something. I'm sorry, Daz. You talk about former players doing this kind of stewardship, but also, a lot of them, their playing days are over, mid-30s.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my own referee experience has been formulated by the fact that I played as well, right? So, yes. Are you a proponent for former players to get into the referee pool and start earning their badges and their levels?
Yeah. Well, I try to encourage this at this end and the FA don't listen. It's my belief that if you, for example, we have all these academies in England, and there's a 2% take up. So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of players being told they're not good enough at such a young age. That's the first thing. Those are, in my opinion, a potential capture of referees. And by that, I would then say, right, I want you to be a referee. They need to go to a form of university academy itself in terms of refereeing. I think that should be a part of the process. But then the procedure would be that, you know, we've had professional players want to be referees, and they're expected to do 8 to 10 years in grassroots football. That's never going to happen. So what you have to do is you have to say, right, okay, you've had X number of years of playing soccer, being fit, reading the game, mobility is not an issue, all those sort of things. We will credit those number of years against your refereeing career. And that then enables them, you know, how the number of steps in England, I think it's 11 stages now. We have 11 ladders to climb. So therefore, I'd give 4 or 5 of those. And I wouldn't give them all at once. I'd give them on a proving ground. If you know, it might be a double jump, it might be a treble jump at some point in their career. But I do think that retention of referees across the world is a problem, and in many ways it's down to ignorance. You know, sometimes I have to think deeply that I'm making a critical remark about a referee, but I'm when I'm writing in the Telegraph, you know, it sells newspapers. I know that, but that's not the issue. I'm trying to be at the same time. I'm trying to inform. I'm trying to actually say, why did this error occur? This error occurred because was this referee, as one of our older referees, was he fatiguing? Was he tired? Now, he shouldn't be, but I could check that. I can check that through his heart monitor and all that goes with it. Because you have to change the perception to reality and deal with reality. So that's when I look at it, and the observation is, look, yes, he's made a mistake. He's made the mistake in law. Has it impacted on the game? We can argue that. The reality is he gave possession to Liverpool when it should have been to Nottingham Forest. It doesn't matter about the outcome. That was when he made his error. And he did it earlier in the game on the reverse. So he did it twice in a game. So then you have to question his law knowledge. Is he up to date with the laws? You know, England there's an arrogance in England, and I'm an English guy. There's a degree of arrogance in refereeing that say, you know, I can remember saying, I want to put all my referees through a law examination. I'll tell you what, they were not happy. The FA were not happy. The Premier League were not happy, because I said, if they fail the fitness test, they can't referee, and fail the fitness test and fail the test on the laws of the game. They wouldn't referee until they did pass. And I think that there's that ongoing need for referees always to study the laws of the game and to be up to date with the laws of the game. You know, and okay, I've not written a You Are the Ref book for a number of years, but the You Are the Ref books were aimed at that very principle of informing the parents and spectators about the laws of the game and the practical aspects of the laws of the game, not the theory.
I think, as a football supporter, I think one of the many issues I have with the officiating, and I'm probably 99% of football supporters will say this, is a consistency. There's no consistency in the refereeing. You've got Curtis Jones for us got sent off for sliding his foot off the ball and then studs onto another player, he gets sent off. The week after, another player does it from another team, and it's a yellow card. The consistency is what irritates me, and it takes the love out of the game for me, Keith.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
It just seems to be the same couple of referees that are doing this every single. I mean, you shouldn't every single week. You know, I love football. First, I watch Liverpool, and then if another team's playing, I'll probably watch it if I'm not chasing my kids around. But I'll watch it, and there's always an incident, and you just like. I just watched Liverpool, and they just got a yellow card or a sending off or offside. I'm watching this game, and the same thing's happening, and nothing is being done about it. That to me is not right. And then changing in the middle of the season as well that's a joke for me.
I think that there is clearly a problem within the PGMOL in terms of consistency to a level. Let me tell you how I used to address it. We would take those critical incidents that happened during the week. I think that in America the term is KMIs. So we would take those incidents, and there might be in a dozen of them. But we would go in a room. I would get the referee in the case of, let's say, the Curtis Jones red card. I would say, right, talk me through that incident in front of all the referees. Talk me through the incident, how you came to that decision, right? Then as a group of referees, we would discuss that. I would lead that discussion. Sometimes I'd have a referee lead that discussion. And I'd say, right, okay, what is the outcome of that debate? Are we, given the same circumstances, going to issue a red card for that offence? Does it meet the criteria of endangering the safety of the opponent? Is it serious foul play? Does it have malice? Let me give you an example where we were probably deemed draconian with one particular area that we agreed on, and we informed the leagues and the managers and everything. I said, where a player places his hand on the neck and face of an opponent, that would be an immediate red card. No discussion around force. None. It would be an immediate red card. That operated for the full remit and tenure of my time at the PGMOL, because I brought it in fairly early. Players knew, managers were informed, everybody knew, the media knew. As a result, we didn't have it. What you get this week is the Manchester United captain putting his hands around the throat of an opponent and nothing. And I'm sat there saying, I've raised expectations with the media, with the fans, that that's a red card, and a red card doesn't appear. And then somebody comes up and says it wasn't a red card because there was no force. Well, that's within the remit. If they want, they can actually say, okay, that is a change of interpretation of the law. If that is the case, the important thing for the league and for the media is to ensure that everybody is aware of that, that he's not committing a red card offence. Now, in the same way, when you look at a challenge that endangers the safety of an opponent, in that challenge, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to have contact with your opponent. You can have excessive force, endanger the safety of an opponent without an outcome of that player being stretchered off or carried off.
Let me ask you this then, Keith.
Can I just put in an incident real quick? You said that, Keith, and it just reminded me of a game I played where one of my guys had the ball. He's running up the midfield, and the other guy tried to take him out. Our guy jumped to evade it, got hurt. But the ref played on. It's like he never touched him. I'm like, yeah, but he had to evade. He would have broke his leg if he didn't evade. So anyway, everything you say brings up something in my head.
This is the point. The point that I'm trying to get across is that as a group, as the PGMOL, you have the law, and you set the criteria for its interpretation. Because you then sit with those referees and say, what is excessive force? And so, you, for example, you know that if a player launches himself with 1 or 2 feet forward off the ground, he is out of control. If a player is close by, he is endangering that safety of the opponent.
It happened this weekend. Liverpool, Notts Forest, Yates with a basic karate kick that was missed.
Correct.
And it looked like it was Kelleher that bumped into Canute, but the dangerous play was there and nothing was done about it.
No, because
if he would have connected with Canute's head, that would have been Canute gone probably for the season.
I can go back when we had an incident involving Cristiano Ronaldo at Old Trafford and he got dismissed. I was the boss then of the PGMOL. And it looked as though there might have been a legal challenge coming in on that red card. And I had to explain to the lawyer very fully, here is the law. Based on a car crash, if you're driving a car in a dangerous manner, you don't necessarily have to crash the car. This is how the law was formulated by the IFAB and how you interpret it. But what is important, and I'm getting back and not hiding from the fact that there are inconsistencies in interpretation because there is a lack of leadership at the PGMOL that gives guidance on what is and what is not, and then explains that to everybody in the media if need be, rather than actually defending the referees all the time, justifying the decisions that they've made and ducking the ones on mic'd up by Howard Webb that he doesn't want to discuss because he knows the referee's got them wrong. Just admit the referee's got it wrong, why he's got it wrong, and what will happen. And that's what we need to be transparent. Let me give you an example of that. I'd been in the job about 6 months as boss of PGMOL. And I had a conversation with the manager and he said, well, you're part of a club, you guys. You police yourself. You've got assessors, former referees sat in the stand smiling, having a cup of tea and a sandwich on us and doing nothing really. I then told them what effectively the role of an assessor was. But I came away from that meeting thinking, whatever I do, whatever I say, I'm not going to convince that manager that there is transparency. So I went to the Premier League and I said, right, I want you to create a panel of former managers or former players. You can decide who they are. You select them. They come to the game. They meet the referee before the match. They listen to his pre-match instructions. They review the performance of the referee. They then talk to the managers of both teams. But before they do that, they go in the dressing room at the end of the match and debrief the referee. And I'll have a matrix that says 1 out of 100 referees, assessors and their marks, 1 out of 100 managers, players and their marks. And then out of which you then got who your very best referees were. Not just the lawmakers, but good man managers. It wasn't, and in the end, it was the players, ex-players, that were actually saying, I think your referees at times are too lenient on dissent. It was from that we formulated a process of how to deal with mass confrontation. So You know, throughout my career, I was a sales and marketing director, and you need to know the products that you sell. The only way you do that is by going on the shop floor and watching them being made. And then I can remember one guy saying to us, you know, Keith, here's a back rail of this kitchen cabinet. Do you know, we make those, you pay for them. All right, fine. I'm going to take you. And he walked me to the other end of the factory, and there was a pile of scrap. And he pulls these pieces of wood out and he says, why are we throwing these away when in fact it could be these back rails in our kitchens, cabinets? That saving that he made was 100,000 quid in a matter of months. And when we gave him a check for 50 grand, he was gobsmacked. And all of a sudden he's getting a check that's equal to my salary at that particular time. But the reality was that it was through communication that I learned of that. And that's how refereeing has to be. It's how, you know, I listen to Mark Elsey. I talk and appear with him on regular on things. And he's an ex-player. And he's had a shortcut into the game. He's a good referee, not involved in referee education. I think that's sad. You know, I've retired from that side of it. But I do think genuinely, when you, in fairness to the referees, it's incumbent on Mark Geiger, for example, at ProRef, to make certain that those referees are applying the laws efficiently, correctly, but also in a uniform manner. And the same applies for a referee. The referee, 90 minutes through, you know, we've had, I can remember years ago running the line for Jack Taylor. He ran the World Cup he refereed the World Cup in 1970. I was at Leeds versus Arsenal. And he said to me, the manager of this club, Don Revy's got a dossier on me. He knows fully what's going on. I can remember sitting at a Sunday afternoon dinner with Bob Paisley. I was an active referee. He's probably one of the world's best managers, underrated. And we got chatting. And he said, we always welcome you at Anfield, Keith, as a referee. And I was really quite chuffed. It was like a guy who I had admired saying he said, I have to prepare my team. I go, and I'm thinking, what's coming? And he said, you know what I have to do with my team? I have to tell them to keep focused because you play advantages that very few referees play. You take risks that very few referees take. My referees have to be up for that and have to be aware. No good arguing with you because you're not there. And I always remember that conversation because it said to me, he'd prepared and he knew me as a referee, just like Don Revy knew Jack Taylor. And, you know, this week I've been answering questions about Mark Clattenburg being appointed by Nottingham Forest as their referee consultant. And my answer was, I'm amazed that other clubs have not appointed similar people in similar roles so that they understand the referee that they're going to get. Mm-hmm. Is that referee, is he quick? What's his tolerance levels? How does he manage 9.15? Is he a stickler on throw-ins? All those sort of things come into play.
I mean, I totally understand where, you know, like Notts Forest are coming from. They're fighting for their lives. You know, every point counts. But did it lead up to a goal? No, it didn't. It was, you know, what a minute 38 seconds later. I understand as a football fan, I understand why they're upset. I keep going back. It's the consistency. You know, again, I'll go back to Curtis Jones sending off the VAR. When the referee went to the monitor, it was a still picture. It wasn't what happened before. It was the still picture of Curtis Jones's studs on the lad's leg. And that's the first thing the referee sees.
Yeah,
And
look, we can get into 4 hours of discussion on VAR.
Yeah.
It's frightening what it's doing to the game over here.
Yeah.
And the first thing is it needs a panel of specialists. That's the first thing. That's all they do. They're accountable for that particular role. In the same way that we have assistant referees at Premier League level, they're accountable for that role. So I'm quite clear on that. I would prefer, rather than Stockley Park, this palace that they built, for those VAR operators to be at the ground.
Brilliant. Yes.
Or in the bus outside. So I'm clear on that. I don't like, I always remember the boss saying he's giving me a bigger office and me saying I don't want one. He goes, why? All we'll do is fill it with rubbish. And the reality is they built a palace at Stockley Park, comfort zone. So for me, bring them to the ground. They're involved in the pre-matching discussion, debate, preparation of the match, the atmosphere, all that goes with it. They can spend the evening before, as the linesmen do, assistants do with the referee. So it's an in-depth preparation. I might even have that same VAR operating with that referee on a fairly regular basis. So the teamwork is really tight. I always use the analogy that if you look at the world record of the 4x100 compared to 100, it's amazing that our teamwork actually gets you around quicker and breaks world records. Anyhow, that's an aside. The reality then is, I want the big screen. I want it just like rugby. I want transparency.
Yeah.
I don't like this hand over mouth and what do you think? We know in England, don't we? We know in England that when the game is stopped and VAR's coming in, a decision is going to be changed. And if the guy goes to the monitor, 99.99999 is going with the VAR. Let me tell you the bigger problem. The bigger problem is this, and I wrote this in the paper a few weeks ago. I want you to think of a tightrope walker, right? He's stepping out on a rope between two high-rise buildings. I'll tell you, every step that he takes, he does with care. It's his decision. He's not relying on anyone else. And he's adjusting to the wind and the rock in the road. It's on him. Now, take that same tightrope walker, put a safety net under like you see at the circus. Mm-hmm. Does he take the same level of concentration? Fear is less. Relaxed he becomes. Doesn't matter if he misses the rope with his right foot and falls off, he's caught. What you've got with VAR is indecision, blame culture. I'll wait on him to tell me. The protocols they'll hide behind, they're not operating them. They're just not operating the protocols. Mm-hmm. And you look and you think, are people daft here? So a goal goes in and we're all waiting and we're thinking, why? We're seeing a delayed flag. Now, I understand what a delayed flag is. I'm not too averse to it being used at the elite level where VAR is in operation. But why are kids, young referees, young linesmen doing that at grassroots level? It's offside. Get the flag up. And this is where I think the consequence of what we're seeing at the elite level, the laws that are being amended at elite level, they're forgetting about the game. There are 30,000 referees in England, 80,000 in Germany, 140,000 in America, right? they're moving away from the game because they're losing that passionate bit. It's not about control. It's about getting support. It's not about being questioned. It's just how they're being questioned. The threats now from verbal are going to physical. And the enjoyment is being impaired because the laws that are being changed are not being changed to simplify it for referees. They're changed because people like me at times watch the television, look at it, and I go, what's he done that for? And even I, then, with a reasonable law knowledge, I'm looking at the law. You know, I'm seeing referees now getting hit with the ball and playing advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying, so look, I'm not, refereeing now is much more difficult than it was in my era. But I think the people who are running the game have to fully understand their responsibility to it. If you're going to operate VAR and you've got two people communicating, that communication has to be precise, clear, to a process that everybody can listen into. When I was developing with Hawkeye goal line technology, you know, I stood up at the Premier League and said I wanted it. And they had the money to say, go ahead and get it. And then I worked with Hawkeye. And I can tell you, we, at 45 seconds for a decision, Hawkeye were reasonably happy. And I said, got to be less than that. What do you mean? 15 seconds is too long. And so we changed the camera speed from 250 to 500 frames per second. We changed the number of cameras around each goal from 3 to 7. We said, and he looked at me as though I'd come off a planet, because I said, no communication other than a goal. And they then said, we can do that through a watch. What I'm getting at here was that whole process was me understanding refereeing and working to achieve the best result for referees in terms of its operation and accuracy. When we look now, we have, for example, we have AI. We operate these offside decisions on broadcast speeds. Broadcast speeds are not at 500 frames per second. So whatever software there's been used, there's a level of inaccuracy. There's total inaccuracy, and it doesn't work without AI because they're not picking up the point of the important bit when the ball is played. AI does that. So why are leagues like the Premier League not introducing AI into the offside decision process? It takes away the element of offside position away from the assistant, away from, if you like, it informs VAR is in an offside position. They then have to compute and determine whether he's active or passive or there's been a deliberate play. So those are the technical areas and issues that need to be addressed in order for VAR to operate, rather than actually trying to justify every week the good decisions against the bad decisions.
Let me ask you something, if you don't mind. You know, when VAR came out, obviously the United States has used it, you know, prior to that. And like you said, they've been pretty successful with it. But one of the arguments against it was, my argument was for it because in this day and age, there's so much money involved in football. People's livelihoods are at stake. Bonuses, player bonuses, obviously, a lot of those are dependent on what happens on the pitch. So you want to be right about things. So how do you reconcile where most people, a lot of supporters were like, it takes out the romanticism of the game, right? Having VAR. And so how do you reconcile those two things where it doesn't lose fans or doesn't make people lose their love for the game?
I think what you do is you actually get it into a position where it's like an assistant referee. It's a tool that aids rather than dominates. It's a tool that you actually don't hide, but you actually give it less importance. And so the first thing I think that you have to do is focus the decision on the referee. It's his decision, not VAR's. VAR is assisting, giving the license when he goes to the monitor to make his own judgment, right? Not to automatically, as we are doing in England, capitulating to what the VAR is saying. Try and educate everyone to understand what is a clear and obvious error. So my view is this. I think VAR could operate completely differently to the way it operates now through verbal communication directly to the referee on all matters of fact in officiating. I'm not going to restrict its use. I'm going to actually improve its use by being less dominant in the role of officiating and more of one of assisting. How do we do that? Well, in the way that you watch a game on TV, you know that there's an error here or a potential error. You whisper in the referee. If you had that ability to say, look, number 7's come in here, have a word with him. You know, you've got the wrong guy here. They're all, make it less formal. This is what I did with the communication kids. You know, from my angle, that looks a penalty kick. These instant judgments, if we then need on those that are confusing, we need to come in on them, but do it more efficiently. And the only way you can reduce that impact of VAR the way it's operating now is to do what rugby do, union, and that is make it part of the entertainment. The game is stopped. The referee says, is there any reason why I shouldn't dismiss this player? Is there any reason why I shouldn't yell at, you know, is there any reason why I shouldn't give a goal? If we need to do that. But I think it's impacting on the enjoyment. And you know, I think look, as a club, we're benefiting. You know, our spectator numbers have risen. And people say, I'm not going to Premier League games anymore. I'm not going to professional games anymore. It's less interesting. But we don't want that to happen.
Well, you know, it seems like obviously this last World Cup, there weren't any English referees, and that's been a trend, right? That they haven't been invited to the top level tournaments and doing those big games like they were. And in this season, we've seen apologies, numerous apologies. We've seen referees being sat down for a week or two. And I don't remember that ever happening in prior seasons. But it doesn't seem like the PGMOL has taken that that seriously, where there's actual processes in place to improve, to be better, because it is a laughing stock. I mean, you know, we joke about it, you know, that the league is so good, but then the standard of refereeing is the worst in the world. I mean, maybe not in the world, but you know, from what we watch on a consistent basis. But it doesn't seem like there's actual anybody at the head of it. There's like, yeah, we realize we have a problem, to do things to improve it.
Look, I can tell you this, and I say it with a degree of pride and other people's recognition. I left the organisation in a really good place, so much so that other countries wanted to replicate, America being one of them. And I left it with a cadre of at least 10 referees who were world class, top level performers, consistently performing well, through a fairly dynamic form of management team that I brought together with skill sets like psychologists, like all those things that are important to referee, and accountability. And let me tell you that in my first few years of tenure in office, I had to face referees and saying, look, with all the support that we've given you as a match official, I'm sorry, you're not making the performances that we expect. Therefore, I'm going to release you. I'm firing you. Or I'm dropping you down. Or you're out the game for a period. Not easy. But then I looked upon it as a role that I had in sales. If you create a budget and you have a sales force and your salesmen have a budget themselves and they don't meet those targets, it's down to me to educate them to achieve that. If they don't, then they're out of the job. So we've got to get out of this role. This is a job. This is a job. I think in the case of not having a referee at the World Cup, not last time, the time before, was because Clattenburg, I think, decided he couldn't get on with Mike Riley. The guy who took over from me was, in my view, a disaster. I knew him as a referee. I said when he was appointed, he was a wrong replacement. I promoted the idea of Peter Walton. Walton became the boss of American referees. And I think he did a reasonable job for a period. A lack of leadership is hopefully going to now be put in position by Howard. The only problem is that Howard faces is, in my opinion, is that he's entered the fray really with less controls than I had or Mike Riley had. Mike Riley became the managing director of the professional game match officials. Howard has come in as the chief refereeing officer, and I don't exactly know what his power base is. Because I have to tell you, I expected, he's not communicated with me, by the way, and we were on regular communication before that. So he's not communicated with me since he came across. He needs to wipe out his middle management structure. It's not good enough. It's not forward thinking, not dynamic. Nothing changes. It's a club and it's a comfort zone, in my opinion. I think there's certain things that they've done quite well. There's too many things that they're not doing well. And I think that Howard has come in and improved the levels of fitness again. He's got them back to where he had it when he was under my management. So I think I'm beginning to see that. I think the movement is becoming more flexible. I'm seeing that. I'm seeing young referees being appointed, but only appointed to 1 or 2 games. That's not enough. And there's too many referees that are coasting and need to go. So I think we're hiding behind VAR in England has been the real problem. The reality is the squad of referees are not good enough. The coaching staff, nowhere near good enough. And the dynamics of expectation and delivery are quite apart at the moment. So I think there's a lot to be done. And it saddens me as a former top English referee that enjoyed going into Europe and doing the like. We're probably down to about 4 or 5 good referees at the moment in the current 25 that's being used.
You know, as a Liverpool fan, we'd be very happy if we don't see Tierney again. It seems like he does our game every other weekend. So we'd love to see some of these younger lads, you know, get more experience and do some of our games moving forward. But anyway, Keith, it's been so great. We could be on here for a lot longer to, you know, and speaking with you. I wish you would update your book. You know, you wrote your book back in what, 86 or something like that. So I wish you would update it. And
I keep getting pestered in that direction.
well, we'll have you back on the show if you ever decide to.
Yeah, sure.
It, you know, we'll put it out to our group. But if not, you know, we appreciate it, and it's been an honor to speak to you as a fellow rough. So appreciate your time today.
I nominate you for to be boss of PGMOL.
I've retired, mate.
But we really
I left it in a good position.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, this hour and a half has gone by so quickly, but you know, just listening to you has opened my mind to a lot of things. You know, after this past weekend and a couple of weekends before that, I was just like I said, falling out of love with football. It's because of the VAR decisions, because of the referee decisions. But you know, this has put a bit more faith back in for me. You know, I've got 3 more months of Klopp, so I'm just going to enjoy it, enjoy myself, and stop.
I think you might stay. You know, I think you might stay.
No,
I just have that. I think you might stay.
Stop, Keith.
That's
stop.
Right.
Look, you and I know, if he's anywhere near Liverpool, he goes to a restaurant, he goes to a pub, he has a walk in the street, even from his car to getting into the stadium, wherever he is, he's going to be pestered by Liverpool fans to stay. You know, he's lucky. He's lucky because the foundation of Liverpool Football Club is built on the likes of Shankly, who I knew and refereed under his management, of you know, Bob Paisley, Ronnie Moran, Roy Evans didn't like me so much. I didn't referee under Klopp. But the whole reality is that the club has history and foundation. And I do say often, and you know, occasionally you get to see an old clip on television of me refereeing at Anfield, and I have to pinch myself that I was involved in a game at Anfield, and the passion that runs through the club, and you suddenly say, wow. And of course, the sad bit is this, and I will always remember the 97. And the reason I remember the 97 is I drive past Hillsborough regularly. It's on my way into the city centre. And I always gulp because, you know, I don't go to Hillsborough that often now because it's not changed. But the mental pictures of what happened that day and what happened thereafter and the injustice, the fight. And this is why when someone says to me, who is the best player that you've refereed? He's more than the best player. Kenny Dalglish epitomizes what is the very best in the game. Fair play, 100% commitment, wonderful ability to communicate, and passion. I took the call that said, Mr. Hackett, I'm involved in, you know, breast cancer charity. Could you please provide me with a referee to referee this charity match? It's a mark of a man, isn't it, Mr. Hackett? You know, so I'm ever grateful that I met him. Might not meet him ever again, but I did meet him, and I did referee him, and that was always a pleasure. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Keith, for that. It's a great ending, and we'll end it there. Please like and subscribe, put your notifications on. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.